Welcome to my channel. Try to hear the latest story.
I walked into that gleaming hotel ballroom wearing my best navy suit, the one I'd bought 3 years ago for job interviews that never came. The chandeliers cast everything in golden light, and men in $1,000 suits mingled with women dripping in jewelry. This was Marcus's night, his company merger celebration, and I was genuinely proud of my younger brother. When he spotted me across the room, his face lit up with that familiar grin. He grabbed my arm and pulled me toward a cluster of investors and executives. Then he opened his mouth and destroyed me. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet my brother Jim. This is my brother, no real job, no future, just a manual laborer." The laughter erupted instantly, sharp and cruel. Our parents joined in, Mom covering her mouth like she was embarrassed by my very existence. Dad just shook his head with that disappointed look I knew too well. I didn't flinch. I just smiled, lifted my glass of champagne, and said, "Cheers. This is the last time any of you will see me." Then I walked away. The room went completely silent. The walk to my truck felt like swimming through thick honey. Every step echoed in my head along with that terrible laughter. I'd driven 2 hours to be here, taken time off from my workshop, bought Marcus a congratulatory gift that cost me $400. Now I sat in my pickup truck in the parking garage, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. The worst part wasn't even the public humiliation. The worst part was that Marcus knew the truth about my work. He'd seen my workshop, watched me restore a Civil War-era rocking chair that sold for $8,000. He knew I'd paid for his MBA program by working double shifts on construction sites, saving every penny while he studied business theory. He knew I'd been quietly covering Mom and Dad's medical bills for the past 2 years, never asking for thanks or recognition. But tonight, in front of his corporate friends, I was just the family embarrassment. The older brother who never amounted to anything. The guy who worked with his hands, while Marcus worked with his mind. I drove home through empty streets, past strip malls and gas stations until I reached my neighborhood. It wasn't fancy like Marcus's gated community, just honest working-class homes with small front yards and American flags on porches. My garage workshop sat behind my modest ranch house, and inside waited my current project, an 1800s mahogany secretary desk that belonged to a private collector in Boston. The restoration would earn me $50,000 more than Marcus probably made in 2 months at his corporate job. I flipped on the workshop lights and stared at the desk. Its veneer had been damaged by water stains and careless handling, but underneath lay incredible craftsmanship. Hand-carved dovetail joints, original brass hardware wood that had been seasoned for decades before some long, dead artisan shaped it into furniture. This desk had survived the Civil War, the Great Depression, 2 world wars. It deserved respect. Just like I did. My phone buzzed on the workbench. 7 missed calls from a New York number I didn't recognize. Probably some telemarketer, but something made me check the voicemail. A woman's voice, professional but warm, asked me to call back about an urgent restoration project. She mentioned Sotheby's auction house and said they'd been trying to reach me for 3 days. I almost deleted the message. After tonight, I wasn't sure I wanted to deal with more wealthy people who might look down on me. But something in her tone suggested this was different. She sounded like she actually respected what I did. I looked back at the mahogany desk, running my fingers over its damaged surface. Maybe it was time to stop hiding my talents from people who would never appreciate them anyway. Maybe it was time to find out what the wider world thought of my work. I picked up my phone and dialed the New York number. Eleanor Whitmore's voice carried the refined accent of old New England money, but when she spoke about furniture, her passion felt genuine. She explained that her late husband had been a serious collector of American antiques, and their estate on Martha's Vineyard needed a master craftsman to restore pieces before they went to auction. "Your name came highly recommended," she said. James Caldwell at Sotheby's showed me photographs of your work on that Federal Period sideboard last spring. Absolutely exquisite technique. I remembered that piece a challenging restoration that had taken me 3 months. The sideboard's original finish had been destroyed by amateur refinishing attempts, but I'd managed to recreate the period-appropriate shellac using traditional methods. I'd never known it ended up at Sotheby's. Mrs. Whitmore, I appreciate the call, but I should mention I don't have formal training in museum conservation. I'm mostly self-taught. She laughed softly. Mr. Thompson, formal training can't replicate what you have. Your hands understand wood the way my late husband's understood music. He was a concert pianist, you know. Never took a lesson until he was 12, but he could make a piano sing like nobody else. She outlined the project. 12 major pieces needed restoration over 6 months. The pay was $300,000 plus all expenses, and I'd live in the estate's guest cottage while I worked. It was more money than I'd ever imagined making, but something else caught my attention. Mrs. Whitmore, you said your husband was a collector. Did he ever acquire pieces from smaller auctions? Private sales? Oh my, yes. Richard bought from everywhere. Estate sales, regional auctions, individual craftsmen. He had an eye for quality regardless of provenance. She paused. Actually, there's something I should tell you. 5 years ago, Richard purchased a restored Duncan Fife table from a small auction house in Albany. He fell in love with the restoration work, said whoever had done it understood the soul of the wood. He kept that table in his private study until the day he died. My breath caught. I'd restored a Duncan Fife table 5 years ago, sold it through a small auction house because I needed quick cash for Dad's heart surgery. I'd poured my soul into that piece, working 18-hour days to get it perfect. Mr. Thompson, are you still there? Yes, ma'am, I think I might know that table. Richard always said he wanted to meet the craftsman who restored it. He called it the finest work he'd ever seen. When James showed me your portfolio, I recognized the same sensitivity, the same understanding. Richard would have been thrilled to know we found you. I sat down hard in my workshop chair. All these years, I'd wondered where that table ended up. I'd put so much care into it, treating it like it was destined for a museum. To learn it had been treasured, displayed in someone's private study, made me feel something I hadn't felt in years. Respected. When would you need me to start, Mrs. Whitmore? Would next Monday be too soon? I know it's short notice, but the estate settlement has deadlines, and frankly, I'd like to get these pieces restored while I'm still spry enough to supervise. I'm 82, you know. I looked around my workshop at the mahogany desk that suddenly seemed like small potatoes. This was the chance I'd been working toward my entire career without even knowing it. Mrs. Whitmore, I'll be there Monday morning. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet workshop for a long time. Outside suburban Chicago, slept peacefully, unaware that my world had just shifted on its axis. Tomorrow, I'd need to arrange for someone to finish the Boston desk, find a house sitter, pack my tools. But tonight, I just wanted to absorb what had happened. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Jim, call me. I think there was a misunderstanding tonight. I deleted it without replying. There had been no misunderstanding, just a long overdue revelation about who my family really thought I was. And now I was about to find out who I really could be. Martha's Vineyard in early autumn felt like stepping into a postcard. The ferry ride from Woods Hole gave me time to process the magnitude of what I'd committed, to watching the island grow larger as we approached. Eleanor had sent a car to meet me at the dock, and the driver wound through narrow roads lined with stone walls and ancient oak trees until we reached the Whitmore estate. The house took my breath away. Not because it was ostentatious, it wasn't, but because every detail spoke of understated elegance, refined over generations. Weathered cedar shingles, white trim that had been lovingly maintained gardens, that looked natural but clearly required expert care. This was old money that didn't need to announce itself. Eleanor greeted me at the front door, a petite woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She wore simple khakis and a cardigan, but her posture and bearing suggested someone accustomed to command. "Mr. Thompson, welcome to Blackberry Point. I trust the ferry ride wasn't too rough?" "Please call me Jim, and the ride was perfect, thank you." She led me through rooms filled with carefully curated antiques, pointing out pieces as we walked. "That highboy is Newport 1760s. The dining table is New York Federal, possibly Duncan Fife's workshop, though we can't prove it. Richard spent 40 years building this collection." We stopped in front of a familiar table in the study. My Duncan Fife restoration displayed prominently near tall windows that caught the afternoon light. Seeing it again after 5 years felt surreal. "He sat at this table every morning," Eleanor said quietly. "Read his newspapers, wrote his correspondence. Always said it was the most beautiful piece in the house." The guest cottage sat 50 yards from the main house, connected by a flagstone path through carefully maintained gardens. Inside, I found everything I'd need: a comfortable bedroom, small kitchen sitting area with a fireplace. But the real treasure was the workshop Eleanor had prepared. The restored carriage house had been converted into a craftsman's paradise. Proper ventilation, excellent lighting temperature control to protect delicate finishes, professional-grade workbenches, tool storage that would make museum conservators jealous. She'd even stocked period-appropriate finishing materials, shellac linseed oil, traditional wood stains made from natural pigments. "This is incredible, Mrs. Whitmore. You didn't need to go to such lengths." "Nonsense. Quality work requires quality conditions. Besides, I suspect we'll have visitors." Before I could ask what she meant, a weathered pickup truck pulled into the circular drive. Out stepped a man in his 70s, lean and tall, with calloused hands and paint-stained clothes. Eleanor introduced him as Thomas Henley, a master furniture maker who'd been working on the island for 50 years. "Tom's going to collaborate with you on a few pieces," Eleanor explained. "He knows traditional techniques that are disappearing." Thomas shook my hand with the firm grip of someone who'd spent decades working with tools. "Heard good things about your work, son. Looking forward to seeing how you handle the Goddard lowboy." Over the next few days, Thomas became both colleague and mentor. He showed me techniques passed down through generations of island craftsmen: how to mix traditional milk paint, how to identify different species of old-growth wood by smell and grain pattern, how to repair joinery without modern adhesives. In return, I shared methods I developed for dealing with water damage and sun bleaching. "You've got instincts," Thomas said on my third day watching me work on a damaged chair rail. "Can't teach that. Either you feel what the wood needs or you don't." The first piece Eleanor wanted restored was an 18th century mahogany secretary desk that had suffered significant water damage. The veneer was lifting, the finish was clouded with white stains, and one of the pigeonholes had split. But underneath the damage, I could see extraordinary craftsmanship. As I worked, word spread around the island about the restoration project. Eleanor had mentioned visitors, and she wasn't kidding. Local antique dealers stopped by to watch me work. A professor from the University of Massachusetts drove down to examine my technique for repairing veneer without damaging the substrate. Even tourists began appearing, drawn by Eleanor's casual mentions at the yacht club. On Friday of my first week, a young woman arrived with camera equipment and a friendly smile. Sarah Chen introduced herself as a documentary filmmaker, working on a PBS series about traditional American craftsmanship. Mrs. Whitmore suggested you might be willing to be interviewed about your work," Sarah explained. "We're documenting artisans who keep old techniques alive." I'd never been comfortable talking about my work, especially to cameras. But something about Sarah's approach put me at ease. She didn't ask about my background or education. She focused on the craft itself, why I chose certain techniques, how I learned to read wood grain, what drew me to restoration work. There's something about bringing a piece back to life. I found myself explaining as her camera rolled. These pieces have history. They've been part of families for generations. When someone trusts you to restore their great-grandmother's china cabinet, you're not just fixing furniture. You're preserving memory. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. How do you balance historical accuracy with necessary repairs? Every decision has to honor the original maker's intention. Sometimes that means accepting imperfections rather than making something look brand new. A hand-planed surface shouldn't look machine perfect. Patina tells a story. As we talked, I realized I'd never articulated my philosophy this clearly before. Working in isolation in my garage workshop, I'd developed these beliefs through trial and error, but I'd never needed to explain them to anyone else. That evening, Eleanor invited me to dinner in the main house. We ate in the formal dining room, surrounded by the collection I was slowly restoring. "You seem to enjoy talking with Sarah today," she observed. "More than I expected. Usually I'm not comfortable explaining my work." "Perhaps because you've been surrounded by people who don't understand its value." Eleanor's tone was gentle but pointed. "Here your expertise is recognized and respected." After dinner, she showed me through Richard's private study again. Besides my Duncan Fife table, the room held books on furniture history, American decorative arts, traditional craftsmanship techniques. On his desk sat a magnifying glass and notebook filled with observations about various pieces in the collection. "Richard would have loved discussing technique with you," Eleanor said. "He understood that true craftsmanship is both art and archaeology." Walking back to the cottage through the moonlit garden, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: purpose. Not just the satisfaction of good work, but the sense that my skills mattered in the broader world. That what I did had value beyond the paycheck. My phone buzzed with another text from Marcus V this week. I glanced at it briefly. Something about family dinner on Sunday, then put the phone away without responding. For the first time in my life, I had more important things to think about. 3 weeks into the project, my world expanded in ways I never anticipated. The PBS crew had returned twice to film more of my work, and Sarah's early interviews were generating unexpected interest. Eleanor mentioned that calls had been coming in from collectors and museums who'd heard about the restoration project. Dr. Amanda Foster from the Metropolitan Museum of Art would like to visit next week, Eleanor announced over our morning coffee. She's their chief curator for American decorative arts. I nearly choked on my coffee. The Met. What could they possibly want with my work? Authenticity, I suspect. Museum conservation programs produce technically competent restorers, but they don't always develop the intuitive understanding that comes from years of hands-on experience. Dr. Foster arrived the following Tuesday, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, who examined my work with the intensity of a detective. She spent an hour studying the secretary desk I'd been restoring, using a jeweler's loupe to examine my repairs. "Remarkable," she finally said. "You've maintained the original maker's tool marks while correcting the water damage. Most restorers would have sanded those away." "Those marks tell part of the story," I explained. "They show how the original craftsman worked, what tools he used. Removing them would be like painting over a signature." Dr. Foster nodded approvingly. "Exactly the philosophy we're looking for. The Met is developing a new initiative for furniture conservation, and we need consultants who understand historical context, not just technical procedures." Before I could respond, Thomas called from across the workshop. "Jim, you need to see this, right now." I'd been working on a 19th century writing desk, a piece that had seemed relatively straightforward. But Thomas had discovered something extraordinary. The desk had hidden compartments revealed when he'd removed damaged veneer from one side panel. "Feel here?" Thomas said, guiding my hand to a section that seemed solid but gave slightly under pressure. "There's a mechanism." Working carefully, we discovered a series of hidden drawers and compartments built into the desk's structure. And inside the largest compartment, wrapped in oiled cloth, we found documents. Dr. Foster examined them with professional excitement. These are personal letters dated 1853. The letterhead says H. Melville, Pittsfield, Massachusetts. My hand started shaking. Herman Melville, the author of Moby Dick. "This desk belonged to Herman Melville," I asked. "It's possible," Dr. Foster said carefully. "We'll need to authenticate the documents, research the desk's provenance. But if this is genuine, you've just discovered a piece of American literary history." Eleanor appeared at my shoulder, having heard the commotion. Richard purchased that desk from an estate sale in western Massachusetts 15 years ago. The family claimed it had belonged to a writer, but they had no documentation. Over the next few days, experts descended on the workshop: handwriting analysts, paper specialists, historians from the Berkshire Historical Society. The consensus grew that the desk had indeed belonged to Melville, and the hidden letters were authentic personal correspondence from the period when he was writing his later novels. The desk alone is worth perhaps $50,000, Dr. Foster explained. With the Melville provenance and the discovered documents, we're looking at a value exceeding $1 million. The discovery attracted national attention. The New York Times sent a reporter. Antiques and Fine Art magazine wanted a cover story. Suddenly, my phone rang constantly with interview requests and job offers. "Jim, this is remarkable," Sarah said, filming my reaction to the media attention. "How does it feel to go from unknown craftsman to nationally recognized expert in just a few weeks?" "Surreal," I admitted. 3 weeks ago, my own family considered me a failure. Now I'm getting calls from the Smithsonian. But the most significant call came from David Morrison, president of Heritage Furniture Company, one of America's largest manufacturers of reproduction antiques. "Mr. Thompson, we'd like to discuss licensing your restoration techniques for our premium line. We're prepared to offer $2 million plus royalties for exclusive rights to your methods." I asked him to call back in a week. This decision felt too important to make quickly. That evening, Eleanor and I sat on her back porch, watching the sunset over Vineyard Sound. The beauty of the moment was marred only by the constant buzzing of my phone. "You're becoming famous," Eleanor observed with amusement. "It doesn't feel real yet. A month ago, I was working alone in my garage, trying to make enough money to cover my parents' medical bills." Eleanor's expression grew serious. "You mentioned your family considers you a failure." I told her about Marcus's merger party, the public humiliation years of condescension from people who never understood what I did. Eleanor listened without comment until I finished. "Their failure to recognize your worth doesn't diminish your accomplishment," she said finally. "But I suspect they're beginning to realize their mistake." She was right. My phone showed 17 missed calls from family members, dozens of text messages that had gone from demanding to pleading to desperate. Apparently, my newfound fame had reached Chicago. Mom had left a voicemail. "Jimmy, we saw you on the news. We're so proud of you, honey. Please call us back." Dad's text was shorter. "Son, I was wrong. Call when you can." Marcus had sent a series of increasingly frantic messages starting with, "We need to talk," and escalating to, "Jim, there's a family emergency. Please respond." I showed the messages to Eleanor, who read them with raised eyebrows. "It seems your transformation has been noted at home." "Too late," I said. "They had 20 years to see my potential. They only care now because other people are paying attention." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps, but people can change, Jim. Sometimes they need a shock to open their eyes." Looking out over the water, I realized she was right about one thing. People could change. I was living proof of that. 3 weeks ago, I'd been hiding my talents, accepting my family's limited view of my potential. Now I was fielding offers from museums and corporations being recognized as an expert in my field. The question was whether my family deserved the chance to see who I'd become. While I was discovering my worth on Martha's Vineyard, my family's world was crumbling back in Chicago. I learned the details later through social media posts and mutual acquaintances, but the timeline became clear enough. Marcus's merger celebration had been premature. Within 2 weeks of that disastrous party, federal investigators raided his company's offices. The merger partner had been laundering money through real estate transactions, and Marcus's firm was under scrutiny for failing to perform adequate due diligence. The Securities and Exchange Commission froze company assets pending investigation. Marcus found himself unemployed overnight, his reputation in the finance industry destroyed. The legal bills alone were staggering, and he faced potential criminal charges for securities fraud. The same colleagues who'd laughed at me that night were now avoiding Marcus. like he carried a contagious disease. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad were facing their own crisis. Dad's insurance company had denied coverage for his latest cardiac procedure, claiming it was experimental. The bills were mounting into six figures, and they'd already mortgaged their house twice. They needed money desperately and suddenly realized their safety net had always been their supposedly worthless older son. For 2 years, I'd been quietly paying their supplemental insurance premiums, covering prescription costs, sending monthly checks that I claimed were just helping out. They'd accepted the money without question, never wondering how a simple manual laborer could afford such generosity. Now, with those payments stopped and their medical bills spiraling, they faced bankruptcy. Patricia, my younger sister, tried reaching out through mutual friends. She told people that the family was worried about me, that they just wanted to make sure I was okay. But everyone knew the truth. They'd seen the news coverage, read the articles about my discovery and growing reputation. They knew I was doing better than fine. Jim's always been the responsible one, Mom told Mrs. Henderson from next door, trying to rebuild my reputation in the neighborhood. We're so proud of his success with those fancy antiques. But Mrs. Henderson remembered the merger party. Her daughter worked at the hotel and had witnessed my humiliation. Word spread quickly through our working-class neighborhood about how the family had treated me. They're calling him now that he's famous, Mrs. Henderson told her book club. Funny how they didn't appreciate him when he was just quietly helping them all these years. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Marcus had introduced me as a failure while I was literally paying for his success. I'd covered part of his MBA expenses, helped with his apartment deposit. When he moved to the city, even co-signed his first car loan. Now he was the one facing financial ruin while I fielded million-dollar offers. Dad swallowed his pride and drove to my house, finding it empty with a for rent sign on the lawn. He asked neighbors where I'd gone, but I'd been careful not to leave a forwarding address. The isolation they'd imposed on me for years had finally worked in my favor. They discovered my whereabouts the same way everyone else did, through news coverage. A segment on CBS Sunday Morning featured my restoration of the Melville desk with sweeping shots of the Martha's Vineyard workshop and interviews about traditional craftsmanship. There I was confident and articulate, explaining my techniques to a national audience. The wood itself guides the restoration, I told the reporter. You have to listen to what it tells you about its history, its original construction, the damage it's suffered. Every piece is a puzzle that requires patience and respect to solve properly. The camera showed close-ups of my hands working on delicate inlays, my face concentrated and serene. I looked nothing like the defeated man who'd walked out of that hotel ballroom. Marcus started calling Eleanor Whitmore, directly, having found her contact information through news articles about the estate. He told her there was a family emergency, that I was needed at home immediately. Eleanor, being polite, passed along the messages, but made it clear she found his approach presumptuous. Your brother seems quite insistent, she mentioned to me one afternoon. He's called 3 times today. I read Marcus's latest voicemail without expression. Jim, this is serious. Dad's in the hospital again. Mom's falling apart. We need you home now. Whatever happened at the party, we can work it out. Family comes first. But I knew Marcus too well. If Dad were truly in danger, he wouldn't be calling my temporary employer. He'd be calling hospitals, doctors, anyone who could actually help. This was manipulation, plain and simple. The final straw came when I learned Marcus had contacted the PBS producer, trying to get my location through Sarah Chen. He told her he was planning a surprise family visit to congratulate me on my success, but Sarah had sensed something off about his approach and declined to help. Someone named Marcus called asking about your filming schedule, Sarah mentioned during our next interview session. He seemed very eager to know when you'd be at the workshop. That evening, I called my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd been keeping an eye on my house. She confirmed what I'd suspected. Your brother came by twice this week, she reported. Asked if I knew how to reach you, seemed pretty desperate. Also, I saw your dad drive by slowly several times like he was hoping you'd come home. They weren't worried about my well-being. They were panicking about their own situation and realizing they'd driven away their only reliable source of help. The family that had branded me worthless now desperately needed me to save them. But I wasn't the same person who'd quietly absorbed their dismissal for years. Martha's Vineyard had shown me what respect felt like, what it meant to be valued for my actual contributions rather than tolerated as the family disappointment. My phone buzzed with yet another text from Marcus. Jim, I know you're getting these messages. Please don't let pride destroy our family. Pride. After 20 years of diminishing my accomplishments, he was accusing me of pride for finally standing up for myself. I deleted the message and went back to work on a Queen Anne highboy that would soon find a home in a museum. Unlike my family's respect, this piece's value was never in question. They found me on a crisp October morning when the maples around the estate had turned brilliant red and gold. I was in the workshop carefully applying the final coat of shellac to the Melville desk while Sarah filmed the process for her documentary. The work required absolute concentration. Each brushstroke had to be perfect, overlapping precisely with the previous one to avoid lap marks in the finish. Thomas was helping by maintaining the temperature and humidity in the workshop, critical factors for achieving a flawless finish. Eleanor sat nearby, watching with the fascination of someone who'd spent decades around fine craftsmanship but had never seen it created. The shellac creates depth that modern finishes can't match, I explained to Sarah's camera. Each coat builds on the previous one, creating a finish that seems to glow from within the wood itself. That's when I heard car doors slamming in the driveway. Through the workshop windows, I saw a rental car disgorging my entire family. Marcus emerged first, looking haggard and pale, followed by Mom and Dad, both moving with the careful steps of people under enormous stress. Jim Eleanor said quietly, "It appears you have visitors." I continued brushing shellac, not missing a stroke. After 6 weeks of growing confidence and recognition, I wasn't about to let my family's sudden appearance rattle me. "Sarah, keep filming. This might be educational." Marcus reached the workshop first, his expensive suit rumpled from travel. He stopped short when he saw the cameras the professional set up. Eleanor, sitting like a distinguished patron observing important work. "Jim," he said, his voice strained, "we need to talk, privately." I finished the section I was working on before looking up. "I'm working, Marcus. This desk is worth over $1 million, and the finish has to be perfect. Whatever you need to say can wait until I reach a stopping point." Mom stepped forward, tears already forming in her eyes. "Jimmy, honey, we've been so worried about you. You haven't returned our calls." "I've been busy," I replied, dipping my brush for the next section. "Mrs. Whitmore, these are my parents, Patricia and Robert Thompson, and my brother Marcus. Everyone, this is Eleanor Whitmore, whose collection I'm restoring." Eleanor rose graciously, extending her hand to each of them. "How lovely to meet Jim's family. He's doing extraordinary work for us. We're so fortunate to have found such a talented craftsman." The word craftsman hung in the air, not manual laborer, not failure. Craftsman. Dad cleared his throat awkwardly. "We saw Jim on television. Very impressive." "Indeed," Eleanor agreed. "Jim has become quite famous in restoration circles. We've had inquiries from museums across the country." Marcus fidgeted, clearly uncomfortable with the formal atmosphere and the cameras. "Jim, seriously, we need to discuss a family situation. Can you take a break?" I looked at Thomas, who nodded, and took over the brushing technique with practiced skill. 10 minutes, I told Marcus. "But the cameras stay." Sarah is documenting traditional restoration methods, and this conversation is part of my story now. We moved to Eleanor's garden, where wrought iron chairs surrounded a table overlooking Vineyard Sound. The setting was peaceful, elegant, about as far from a Chicago hotel ballroom as you could imagine. "This is quite a place," Mom said, looking around nervously. "It's been my home for 6 weeks," I replied. "Mrs. Whitmore has been incredibly generous, providing ideal working conditions and connecting me with experts in my field. Marcus leaned forward, desperation creeping into his voice. Jim, I know things got out of hand at the party. I was drinking, trying to impress people. I didn't mean what I said. What exactly didn't you mean that I have no real job, no future? That I'm just a manual laborer? Dad winced. Son, we know your work is skilled. We've always known that. Have you? I asked. Because for 2 years, I've been covering your medical bills, Marcus's student loans, emergency repairs on your house. I've been doing that with money earned from my worthless manual labor. Did you ever wonder where a failure like me got that kind of money? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Sarah's camera captured every expression, every telling pause. Mom began crying quietly. We didn't realize. We thought you were just being generous. I was being generous, but you accepted my help while dismissing the work that made it possible. I gestured towards the Ryder workshop. That desk I'm restoring, it's worth more than Marcus made in his best year at the investment firm. The techniques I'm using were developed over decades of self-education and practice. Museums are hiring me as a consultant. Furniture manufacturers want to license my methods. But none of that mattered to you until other people started paying attention. Marcus stood up abruptly, his composure cracking. Fine, we screwed up. We didn't appreciate you properly. But right now, Dad needs surgery that insurance won't cover. Mom's medications cost $800 a month. My legal bills are destroying me. We need your help, Jim. Now you need my help, I said calmly. Where was your respect when I was quietly providing that help for years? Jim, Dad said, his voice barely above a whisper. I know we failed you. I know we should have recognized your talents sooner, but we're family. That has to count for something. Before I could respond, Eleanor appeared with a visitor, Dr. Foster, from the Metropolitan Museum, accompanied by 2 colleagues. Jim, Eleanor called, "The Smithsonian representatives are here to discuss the exhibition proposal." I stood up, straightening my work shirt. Dr. Foster, perfect timing. I was just finishing the final coat on the Melville desk. Dr. Foster approached with obvious excitement. Jim, I'd like you to meet Dr. Robert Kellerman from the National Museum of American History and Janet Morrison from the Smithsonian's Conservation Program. They're here to formalize the museum's acquisition of several pieces from your restoration work. The conversation that followed was surreal. Here I was, discussing million-dollar acquisitions and permanent exhibitions with some of the most respected institutions in America, while my family sat nearby in stunned silence. Your documentation of traditional techniques is invaluable, Dr. Kellerman explained. We want to include your work in a major exhibition about American craftsmanship. The Melville desk will be the centerpiece, but we're also interested in acquiring 3 other pieces you've restored. The exposure would establish you as one of the premier restoration experts in the country, Janet added. We're also proposing that you conduct seminars at the Smithsonian teaching traditional methods to conservation students. After the museum officials left, my family remained in the garden processing what they'd witnessed. Jimmy, Mom said finally, we had no idea your work was so important. It was always important, I replied. You just weren't paying attention. Marcus looked defeated. So what happens now? Do you just write us off, forget we exist? I considered the question seriously. I'll pay for Dad's surgery and Mom's medications. I'll always make sure you have what you need medically. But the relationship we had before is over. I'm not hiding my success anymore to make you comfortable with your assumptions. That's fair, Dad said quietly. More than fair given how we treated you. But there's a condition, I continued. Marcus, you need to publicly acknowledge what really happened at that party. Not just to me, but to everyone who was there. You introduced me as a failure while I was supporting the family financially. You need to tell the truth about that. Marcus swallowed hard but nodded. I can do that. As my family prepared to leave, Eleanor approached with one final surprise. Before you go, she said, I thought you might like to see something. She led us back to the main house to Richard's study where my Duncan Fife table sat in its place of honor. Jim restored this piece 5 years ago, Eleanor explained to my family. My late husband treasured it, said it was the finest restoration work he'd ever seen. He spent his final morning at this table reading and writing letters. Your son's craftsmanship provided beauty and comfort during some of our most precious moments. Mom reached out tentatively to touch the table's surface. You made this beautiful. I restored it, I corrected. The beauty was always there. I just revealed it again. As they walked toward their rental car, Dad turned back. Son, I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago. Watching them drive away, I felt something unexpected. Not anger or satisfaction, but a kind of peaceful closure. They'd seen who I really was now. The relationship would never be the same, but maybe it could be something better. Something based on truth rather than false assumptions. Sarah appeared at my shoulder, having filmed the entire encounter. How do you feel? I looked back toward the workshop where Thomas was probably finishing the final coat on the Melville desk. Tomorrow that desk would begin its journey to the Smithsonian, where millions of people would see it and learn about traditional American craftsmanship. Like I finally know who I am, I said. 6 months after that confrontation in Eleanor's garden, I stood in the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, watching visitors examine the Melville desk. The exhibition, Masters of the Craft Traditional American Furniture Making, had drawn record crowds. People gathered around each piece reading placards that explained not just the historical significance of the furniture, but the restoration techniques used to preserve them. Sarah's PBS documentary had aired 3 months earlier to critical acclaim, winning a regional Emmy for outstanding cultural programming. The film followed my journey from the garage workshop in Chicago, through the discovery at Martha's Vineyard, culminating with the museum exhibition, but more importantly, it sparked a national conversation about the value of traditional skills and the dignity of craft work. The furniture manufacturer's licensing deal had provided financial security I'd never imagined. $2 million up front, plus royalties that would continue for decades as Heritage Furniture Company produced pieces using my documented techniques. But money wasn't what mattered most anymore. It was the respect, the recognition that my skills had genuine value in the modern world. My Restoration Academy on Martha's Vineyard had become a reality. Eleanor had donated the use of her carriage house workshop, and we'd launched a program teaching traditional techniques to a new generation of craftspeople. Our first class of 12 students included recent college graduates, career changers, and military veterans seeking meaningful work with their hands. The key to understanding wood. I explained to my current apprentice, a young woman named Jessica, who'd left her corporate job to learn furniture restoration, is patience. This walnut veneer is over 200 years old. It's seen generations of families survived moves, and renovations absorbed decades of daily life. When you sand it, you're removing history. Every stroke has to be deliberate. Jessica nodded seriously, applying the lessons with the focus of someone who understood she was learning more than just technique. She was learning to see beauty in damaged things, to find value in restoration rather than replacement. Thomas, now officially my co-instructor despite being nominally retired, watched approvingly. Jim's teaching you to think like the wood, he told Jessica. That's not something you learn in school. The academy had brought unexpected visitors to Martha's Vineyard. Collectors flew in from Europe to watch us work. Museum conservators came to learn techniques that weren't taught in formal programs. Even furniture manufacturers sent representatives to understand how traditional methods could improve their products. But the most meaningful visit had come from Marcus. He'd driven up from Boston, where he'd taken a junior position with a small investment firm after completing community service and paying substantial fines. The federal investigation had concluded without criminal charges, but his reputation in high finance was permanently damaged. He was rebuilding his career one client at a time, learning humility along the way. I owe you more than money, he'd said, watching me work on a federal period sideboard. I owe you an apology that goes back years, not just to that one night. The public apology he'd promised had been awkward, but sincere. He'd contacted everyone who'd been at the merger party, explaining that his introduction of me had been not just wrong, but deliberately cruel. He'd revealed that I'd been supporting the family financially through work he'd characterized as worthless. Several of the executives at that party had actually reached out to me afterward, expressing respect for my skills and integrity. You showed me what real success looks like, Marcus continued. It's not about impressing people who don't matter. It's about being excellent at something that does matter. Our relationship would never be what it had been in childhood, but it was honest now. Marcus visited every few months, bringing Dad for fishing trips and Mom for garden tours. They'd learned to ask about my work with genuine interest rather than polite obligation. The transformation in my parents had been the most touching. Dad, whose heart condition was now stable, thanks to the surgery I'd funded, had started reading books about American furniture history. He could discuss federal period characteristics and identify different types of wood joinery. Mom kept newspaper clippings about my exhibitions and interviews, creating a scrapbook she showed to neighbors with obvious pride. We wasted so many years not seeing who you really were, she'd said during their last visit. But we see you now, honey. We see you clearly. Eleanor, now 83 but still sharp as ever, had become like a second mother to me. She attended every exhibition opening, introduced me to her network of collectors and historians, and never missed an opportunity to promote the Academy. Richard would be so pleased, Schwa Grace, she'd said at the Smithsonian opening. He always believed that real craftsmanship was about preserving beauty for future generations. That's exactly what you're doing. The financial success had allowed me to do something I'd always dreamed of but never thought possible. I'd established a scholarship fund for young people from working-class families who wanted to learn traditional crafts. The Jim Thompson Foundation provided tools, materials, and stipends for students who might not otherwise afford such training. Our first scholarship recipient, a 19-year-old named Carlos, whose father worked construction, had natural talent that reminded me of myself at that age. He'd grown up around tools and wood, but had never imagined that his instinctive understanding could become a respected profession. My friends think I'm crazy for not going to business school, Carlos confided one afternoon. They say working with your hands is for people who can't do anything else. What do you think? I asked. He considered the question while carefully shaping a piece of maple with a hand plane. I think people who say that have never created anything beautiful that will last 200 years. Looking around the workshop that afternoon, Jessica learning to repair veneer damage, Carlos mastering traditional joinery, Thomas sharing stories of island craftsmen from decades past. I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from work aligned with purpose. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen. Jim just got word that the documentary won the National Emmy for Outstanding Cultural Programming. Congratulations. I smiled, but the award felt less important than the scene around me. Real success wasn't about recognition or money, though both were gratifying. Real success was about knowing your own worth and surrounding yourself with people who recognized it. That evening, I sat on Eleanor's back porch, as I had so many times before, watching the sun set over Vineyard Sound. The beauty of the moment was enhanced, rather than interrupted, by the distant sounds of students in the workshop, putting finishing touches on their projects. Satisfied? Eleanor asked, settling into the chair beside me. Grateful, I corrected. That humiliation at Marcus's party was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to stop hiding my talents from people who would never appreciate them. And what's the lesson in that? I thought about the question seriously. I spent 20 years seeking validation from people who didn't understand the value of what I did. I let their ignorance define my worth instead of trusting my own knowledge of my abilities. The lesson is that you can't wait for other people to recognize your value. You have to recognize it yourself and surround yourself with people who share that recognition. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Richard used to say that the worst tragedy wasn't failing at something you loved, but succeeding at something that didn't matter to you. As darkness fell over the island, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. 6 months ago, I'd been hiding my talents, accepting my family's dismissive view of my potential working in isolation. Now I was teaching the next generation of craftspeople, consulting with major museums, and building a legacy that would outlast any single piece of furniture I might restore. My phone rang with a call from Dr. Foster at the Met. "Jim, we've got an emergency restoration project. 18th century Chippendale desk water damage from a pipe burst. Can you come to New York next week?" "Absolutely," I replied. "Text me the details." After hanging up, I realized that this was what contentment felt like. Not the absence of challenge, but the presence of meaningful work, appreciated by people who understood its value. Eleanor stood to go inside, pausing to squeeze my shoulder. Richard always said that the best furniture gets more beautiful with age and proper care. The same is true of people, I think. Alone on the porch, I thought about the young craftspeople inside the workshop, each learning skills that connected them to generations of American artisans. Tomorrow, I'd teach them something new about reading wood grain or mixing traditional finishes. Next week, I'd restore a piece that would be treasured for centuries. Next month, I'd welcome new students who'd chosen craft over corporate careers. The humiliation that had driven me away from my family had led me to discover not just my professional worth, but my own value as a teacher mentor and keeper of traditional skills. Marcus's cruel introduction had been meant to diminish me, but instead, it had freed me to become who I was meant to be. Sometimes the greatest gift comes disguised as the deepest wound. Sometimes losing the respect of people who never understood you is the first step toward finding people who do. I'd learned that real success isn't about proving your worth to people who've already decided you're worthless. It's about recognizing your own value and building a life around work that matters, surrounded by people who appreciate both your skills and your character. The waves lapped gently against the shore below, and somewhere in the workshop behind me, a young carpenter was learning to listen to what the wood could teach him. The future felt bright, purposeful, and entirely my own. Have you ever been in a situation where people underestimated your abilities or didn't recognize your true potential? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below about times when you had to prove your worth or when someone finally saw your real value. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear that their talents matter even if others don't see them yet. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding your true worth and standing up for yourself when others try to diminish your achievements. Thank you for joining me on this journey of self-discovery and recognition. Remember, your skills and talents have value regardless of whether others acknowledge them. Keep creating, keep growing, and never let anyone convince you that honest work done with excellence is anything less than admirable. Until next time, may you always know your worth and surround yourself with people who see it too.